to the KJ Methods YouTube channel. What I want to talk about today is the closing timeline. So many students have said, hey KJ, now I have my license. I don't even know what happens to get to a closing. So I told them I would do a video on it that I thought would be helpful. So let's get started. The first thing that happens is the listing. And the listing is the agency agreement, if you remember, between your broker and the seller. You are allowed to work with the seller because your agency with your broker allows it. But remember, you do not have any direct connection with the seller. But because your broker represents the seller, you also represent the seller. So now you have this property and you need to advertise it. So what do? You put it on the multiple listing service. The whole point of you putting it on the multiple listing service is so that you can find someone, another agent, who may have the buyer, who may be interested in your property. Contrary to what a lot of new students think, if you have the seller, you don't necessarily also have the buyer. It happens sometime, but not most often. The next thing that we want to look at is buyer representation. Understand that if you have the buyer, you want to first make sure that your buyer is pre-approved, not just pre-qualified. And you should know the differences between that. Essentially, pre-qualification, it's not really that good, right? Because the person just told the bank what the money is that they're making, what their credit is, and so forth. But with a pre-approval, the bank has actually gone through the process of checking this person out and making certain that at least at this point in time, the bank would be able to give them a loan. The bank is also going to make certain disclosures to that person. You remember TILA, RESPA disclosures, which is a TRID, right? TILA, RESPA integrated disclosure, also called the loan estimate. And so within 3 days of application, the law says, hey, this person needs to get a TILA RESPA integrated disclosure so that they know what the cost of the credit is going to be and what all the settlement costs are going to be. Once the bank then pre-approves this person, they're going to start looking for a home in the price range that they were approved for. All right, the next thing is the offer. So who makes the offer? The buyer makes the offer. So we call the buyer the offeror, and the buyer is going to make this offer according to the price they're looking for, the terms that they want, the contingencies that they want, and they're also going to put in there who their attorney is going to be. And so first of all, they're just presenting it to the seller at this point, saying, hey, these are the things that I would like to have. The buyer is also going to include earnest money with that offer. Now, if you remember, earnest money is not required, but it's a good thing to send with the offer because earnest money really just serves as saying, hey, I am going to go through with this contract. I'm not wasting your time. The next thing that happens is that there is going to be a response to the offer. And what are the choices? Reject it, right? Accept it, or counter. That's what we most of the time see. We counter the offer. Not exactly certain that I like this or I don't like that, I like this. And then we just kind of keep going back and forth between offeror and offeree. Who's the offeree now? The offeree is the seller. And so we go back and forth between offeror and offeree. And then hopefully at some point in time, we get to what we call a meeting of the minds, which is also known as mutual assent. Now we talk about notice. Notice is very important because a lot of students, even when we do test questions, they say, hey, if they signed the offer, they accepted the offer. Well, that may very well be true, but we are never in contract until there is actual or constructive communication from the offeree back to the offeror. And that is really the only time that we're going to be considered to be in contract. So now we're under contract, at least insofar as the mutual assent, right? But we have to make sure all of the elements of contracts are present. We're going to presume that they are all there. And as long as there is nothing that can pull this contract back, right, meaning avoidable contract, then we just move forward with the contract. Now we get to the point of what we're calling contingency. So I always say to my students, don't spend your money yet, because there are 3 significant times that this contract can fall through. The first one is called due diligence. And due diligence is something where the offeror can look at the house, look at the neighborhood. There are certain things that they would do at this point in time. Now, we're supposed to all be moving towards getting to a closing, but in truth, in due diligence, the person could get out of the contract for any reason or no reason at all. The due diligence period is generally, 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, 10 days. There's no standard, okay? You can ask for whatever due diligence you want. But the point of the matter is, if we go through due diligence and the person doesn't like something, they have a right to rescind. If you remember, that means they can get out of it. No penalty at all. They get all of their money back. If there is no right to rescind, we just move forward to potentially what is the next contingency. The next contingency would be an appraisal contingency. Now, this is where the bank sends someone out to value the property. So this could happen immediately. It's generally right around within 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks, but we really are limited by when the bank is going to send the person out. But the bank sends the person out. They're going to say, yes, this house is valued at this, or it's not valued at this. This is a contingency that can be waived. In other words, the person says, I don't really care what it appraises at, but the bank does care what it appraises at. And so if it doesn't appraise for that price, then the bank is not going to give the loan on the whole amount. They're going to give it on the appraisal amount. So what is the buyer going to have to do? They would pay the difference if they said, I want to waive the appraisal contingency. Most buyers are not going to do it, particularly not first-time home buyers, but you may have a lot of investors that do waive appraisal. And today, with the market being so fast, people have been waiving appraisal, but that means they have a savings that they are going to be able to pay the difference. And lastly, if it does appraise, there's no problems with the appraisal, we move forward to the next thing. The next thing is financing contingency. The bank now has to say, hey, yeah, I'm going to actually give you the loan. No time frame for this also. We're waiting for the bank, but it's generally less than a month, something less than a month, 25 days, 28 days, something less than a month, because this person is already pre-approved. So the bank is just rechecking, doing all of the paperwork and so forth. Again, financing contingencies could also be waived. But what you're essentially saying is, I don't need financing, right? I have cash, all right? So it doesn't happen all the time. We see it a lot more now in this market, but typical, particularly first-time home buyers, that's not going to happen, okay? So we have this financing contingency, and again, right to rescind. If the bank says, no, I'm not giving this person a loan, then the person is able to get out of it. If the bank says, hey, they're good, we are going to give this person a loan, then the bank issues what we call a clear to close, saying, hey, let's go ahead and go to closing, and then the closing is scheduled. Next, we have the final disclosures, right? So this bank has issued the clear to close, but 3 days before the closing, the bank has to give this borrower more disclosures. This is the TRID again, right? But this TRID is different from the first TRID. First one is called the estimate of the loan. This is called the closing disclosure, which is actually what the real numbers are going to be. And what the person really is supposed to do is look at the loan estimate and the closing disclosure to see how they compare to one another. But it's going to have all the debits, all the credits, and the bottom line, it's going to say how much this borrower needs to bring to closing. Next, the purchaser is going to take that amount from the closing disclosure and wire it in to the attorney's office so that when we have the closing, the money is already there. Then we have the closing. This is where we go to the attorney's office. The attorney is going to essentially have the deed transferred from the grantor to the grantee, right? From the seller to the buyer. The attorney is going to make sure that everything is done correctly. All the signatures are there. All the notarizations are there. And once that is done, all of the contractual obligations are now over, as long as there hasn't been a survival clause or there wasn't a survival clause in the contract. And the contract moves now from executory to executed. And then lastly, the attorney is going to disperse all of these funds, right? They're going to disperse it to the title company, going to disperse the funds out for commissions. They're going to pay the seller's loan off and then give the rest of the money to the seller. And that essentially at that point is the end of the closing. Well, I hope this video was helpful. Once again, thank you so much for coming to the KJ Methods YouTube channel. Don't forget, like, subscribe, and share this video with all who may be interested. Have a great day. See you next time.